So like I said, my name is Matt Cassidy. I'm a grateful recovered alcoholic. And, I don't know about anybody else, but, when I got to speak, it's like today's Wednesday. I start planning Wednesday's talk somewhere around Sunday, maybe begin an early start, do it Saturday. So, and then it all goes out the window, when they say meeting begins, because, it's like it's supposed to be God speaking, not my pre-planned talk. But I do get the Grapevine Daily quote. And the other day, the Grapevine Daily quote, I was just like, it was so cool to me that I did want to share it, while I talk and kind of like make it the topic of, what I was going to speak about. So, this is from July 17th, Grapevine Daily quote. It's from Bill Wilson from an article from September 1957. It says, though my sobriety had come easy, the growing up business hadn't. Both emotional and spiritual growth have always been mighty difficult for me. And that kind of sums up exactly, what I'm going to share about. I'm going to share, like how it works says, I'm going to share in a general way what I used to be like as an active alcoholic, what happened, the 12 steps of recovery in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and what I'm like now as a result of that guaranteed spiritual awakening that happened as a result of these steps. And, to be transparent, I'll probably even talking about, all the areas that I fall short, which keep my 10th and 11th step, interesting. But, the other thing I wanted to talk about, I do chair a detox meeting every other Sunday, in my area. And it's just, it always amazes me, the misconception that that a lot of people who call themselves an alcoholic have about this disease of alcoholism, and it's one that I had when I first showed up too, was the belief that when I put alcohol in my body, that's when the trouble begins, but what I know today due to good sponsorship and, reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the problem is what happens before I put the drink in, how I can't handle sobriety, how living sober is just so uncomfortable that I'm going to turn back to the only thing that takes care of it, which is alcohol, unless I find a spiritual awakening. So page 24 of the big book, the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. So I grew up in a family of alcoholics. Like I said, my last name's Cassidy, and, I'm Irish on my mother's side, I'm Irish on my father's side, which means, in my family, if you're not alcoholic, you marry one because that's what you consider normal. Growing up in alcoholism and living in alcoholism, it's like, what do you do when you grow up? Well, you go and seek out alcoholism. And, sometimes you do it without even knowing that, that you're looking for it. So thank God for other 12-step fellowships, that the people can turn to if if their spiritual malady is not alcohol. But I grew up in an alcoholic family, like I said, and as a little kid, I did not want to be alcoholic. I thought I had a choice in the matter. I thought that, being alcoholic was something that, they chose. And that was, a preconceived notion that I had, about alcoholism, that, my dad chose to be alcoholic, that my grandma chose to be alcoholic, and my other grandfather chose to be alcoholic. Like it was something at career day, like, maybe they lined up, for career day, and the line at the alcohol table was nice and short. So that's the one that they, went to so that they can, get it over and done with. So I thought I had a choice in the matter. So as a young kid, I chose not to be alcoholic. And I know today that if I have the disease of alcoholism, if I suffer from both parts, the physical allergy as well as the mental obsession, that, when it comes to having a disease, I love the fact that I have one that is treatable. So it's a pain in the butt at times, but thank God it's treatable, so I don't have to die from it. I went to I just went to a wake recently of somebody who died of Parkinson's. So it's like it's a fatal illness. I went to somebody, a wake of somebody who died from ALS. It's a fatal illness. So there are other illnesses that you can have, that there is no treatment for. And so when you get that diagnosis, that it's a death sentence. So thank God, we get to self-diagnose ourselves as alcoholic. And then if we so choose, the only choice I have in the matter is, am I going to follow a spiritual course of action that's going to get me a guaranteed spiritual awakening, which it tells me we agnostics is the only thing that's going to take care of my illness. When it comes to, that delusion that I had choice would carry over into my adult years, especially when it came to my drinking. I love how it says we're without defense against that first drink, because if I could choose not to drink, I would if I was intelligent as I thought I was, I would probably not, continue to do something that I continuously see to be harmful. but it just doesn't work that way as an alcoholic. I suffer from this delusion that this time it's going to be different, that I'll be able to control my drinking, and, it not get bad, and there won't be any bad side effects. My drinking, the first drunk I remember, was, it just kind of happened. The physical allergy snuck up on me because I didn't know about its existence. But, I put one drink in my body, and that drink demanded another drink. So I took a second drink, and that led on to as many as I possibly could. And it's, I know today that the physical allergy, once triggered, has full control over me, because at that party, I dropped the glass I was drinking out of, because, again, I didn't want to be alcoholic, and alcoholics drink out of the bottle or the can. If you pour it in a glass, that makes you, a little bit, top shelf. And, alcoholics are, bottom shelf people. So clearly I'm not alcoholic if I'm drinking out of a glass. But anywho, I dropped that glass on the floor, it shatters, and everybody at the party looks at me, and I remember being embarrassed. But then I remember not caring because there was more alcohol in the fridge. The fact that I had just made a spectacle of myself, and the fact that I was so intoxicated I couldn't even hold on to a glass, just kind of, did not affect me at all, because my body was just demanding more alcohol. And that's exactly what I was going to do that night. I was going to drink, until I got my first blackout. I found out real early projectile vomiting was an art form, and I had mastered it, at an early age. Passing out was a short nap. We don't call it passing out. It's just, a minuscule lapse of consciousness. It's just completely normal. It's like, so all that stuff, is just all the consequences that, normal people would be like, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. For me, it was like, okay, it is what it is. But what I had found was that answer that took care of that internal condition, that spirit, that spiritual malady. It's like, because once I started drinking, all those feelings of not fitting in, not being good enough, if they found out about me, they wouldn't want to be with me. They would shun me if they knew the real me. The chameleon side of me, where if you were talking about one thing, I was totally into that. But if I went to another group and they were talking about something else, all of a sudden I was an expert on that subject. So I always had to like blend in. But when you put some alcohol in me, and all of a sudden it's just like I can be me because I'm comfortable being that me. So. And I woke up the next morning with, it was my first hangover, and that was completely fine too, because, for me, there was like, all right, if this is the price of admission for being okay, then I'm willing to pay that paycheck, but unfortunately, it says in the big book that alcoholism is a progressive illness. So the paycheck that I continued to pay only got worse. I don't know what it cost anybody, you guys, but for me, it cost me a lot of personal relationships. It caused me, a lot of broken family relations, and it's like nothing good ever came out of my drinking. Like anytime I came out of, a blackout, or I woke up the following morning after blackout, that, it amazes me how when the sentence from somebody started with a scowl and the following sentence, do you know what you did last night? My first thought was never good. It was never like, did I give too much money to charity again? Did I help too many little old ladies across the street? It was always going to be bad. And I did not want anybody to know that I didn't know, because I did have a mother who was in Al-Anon. My mother went into Al-Anon just before my 9th birthday. So I knew enough about alcoholism to know what a blackout was, and to know I was experiencing them. So I didn't want anybody else to know that I was experiencing blackouts. So I would do my best, to try and have people fill in the gaps for me. It's like, yeah, it's like, well, what do you think about what I did last night? Tell me what you think. It's like I always try to get a little bit of information so I could and for me, I wanted the information for one thing and one thing only. I wanted to be able to set up the apology, because I knew anytime the sentence started with, do you know what you did last night? I owed an apology for something. And, when we talk about amends later, we'll see, I wholeheartedly abuse the words, I'm sorry. The words, I'm sorry, they meant nothing, because I never backed it up with any type of, action or change, or any real remorse, but my drinking only got worse. I had a couple of run-ins with the law, but I have family in law enforcement, so they kind of get like a little courtesy of like not getting what I should deserve. It's actually kind of funny. I went to a wake last week for a guy I went to high school with, and it's the conversation started off with, it's like, dude, I can't even remember the last time we spoke. I was like, you know what? I was like, when was the last time I saw you? I was like, the only thing I kept thinking of, I'm like, was it the time we almost got arrested? And he goes, yeah, I think that was it. He goes, I'm pretty sure that was it. And my son, I forgot my son was standing next to me, and that he's 10 years old. So he's like comprehending what I'm saying. He goes, Dad, you almost got arrested. And I was like, that's a long story for when you get older, but it was the one of the times I almost got arrested. And, that time was a little bit worse than, the first time, because the first time I almost got arrested, the cop just gave me one option. He pulled me over for DWI, and he said, look, he says, you can use that payphone. And it was literally within, a stone's throw from where I was in the car. He goes, you can use that payphone to call somebody to pick you up, or you can call a cab. He said, but if I see you on the road, he says, and I have to pull you over again, he says, you will be getting arrested. So I said, okay, officer, thank you very much. And, he left to go do, probably more important things than, stop a knucklehead on the road from, doing something he wasn't supposed to do, and I looked at that payphone, and, the first thought that occurred to me was, number one, I had no money on me to make a phone call. And number two, even if I had the money to make a phone call, I couldn't think of a single soul who would have come and helped me. So that was the condition of my life. And like I said, the second time I almost got arrested, I was still living with my parents at the time, because I did get sober at 19. If I didn't say so, my sobriety date is May the 5th of 1996. So I do what every Irish kid does on Cinco de Mayo, you get sober. So I've been looking for 25 years for the Mexican guy who got sober on St. Patty's Day. And when I find that guy, him and I are going to, start 12, we're going to start a big book study, so, it should be a lot of fun. I'm always on the lookout for that guy. But the second time I almost got arrested, what came of it was the cop, he took me for possession of an illegal narcotic, and he took my brother, who was publicly intoxicated, and again, because we got family in law enforcement, instead of arresting us, he said that, he took us home, actually, is what he did, so, he took us home, and, he had us go wake up my mother, and I guess the cat's about to get let out of the bag. The family in law enforcement was my father, so I had to go up into my mother's bedroom where she was sleeping. Oh, by the way, I should throw out there, just for full disclosure, this was Thanksgiving night. So, happy Thanksgiving. Mom, there's a cop downstairs who wants to talk to you. So the thing about it now, that I can see through sober eyes, is I had just told a woman, whose husband was at work, that there's a cop downstairs who wanted to talk to her. So her first thought is not, what did my knucklehead son do? It's, oh my God, my husband is dead. So she comes down, and she came downstairs, and, the cop was like, I believe she fell down onto the step, and the cop was like, so he told her why, he brought us home. And my mother, at that point, she pretty much was just like, whatever, because her husband wasn't dead, so we share that story today, because I'm sober, and because she's continued her membership in Al-Anon, we can share that story today. Just like, it's like, look how bad it got, and, so full transparency, if you guys look, my mom's actually on this listening, so it's kind of keeping me honest of everything. So, yeah, it's, and it only got worse from there, so, the drinking just got worse, the behavior got worse. And, so it came to the, for me, it came to the time where, on separate occasions, both my parents were, telling me that they would throw me out of the house. My mother told me one day, if I was not her son, she'd throw me out of her house. And again, if I could stop due to consequences, if I could bring into my mind the effect of, oh my God, looking at the pain I'm causing other people, I should stop this. If I had that power of choice, the conversation with, if you were not my son, I would throw you out, would straighten out, somebody who has the ability to make a choice whether they're going to drink or not. But as an active alcoholic, what I heard is, well, I'm still her son, so I'm not going to get thrown out. So that was about 6 months before I got sober, 6-7 months before I put down the drink. So I'll fast forward to that last drink, because, like this, it says in the book, like, what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. So, drinking is only 1/3 of my story. So I'm not going to bore you guys for the next, 15-20 minutes talking about that, because I do want to spend a lot more time talking about, what God has done for me, through the 12 steps. So my last drunk, I was standing in my driveway getting ready to go to a party. And it was not a party that I was invited to because they wanted me to be there. it was a party that I was invited to because of who my brother was. So it was my brother's friends, it was my brother's roommates, so I was being invited because of, my association to, my blood association to another human being. So when I show up to the party, I'm sorry, I'm on my way to the party, and I made a decision, because there it is, there's that power of choice that I think I have, whether I'm going to drink or not. I made a choice that I was not going to drink. So that night I wasn't going to drink, and it's not because I didn't want to drink. It's because at this point I was sick and tired of people telling me that I was alcoholic. So if I could prove to you that I'm not alcoholic, then you'll stop calling it to me, and then I could drink the way I want to drink. So how screwed up is that? So and again, I think it's completely normal. So I'm on my way to the party, and this thought pops into my head. It came out of right field. It's not like I conjured it. It's not like I thought about it. It's not like, I made it happen. It just popped into my head. The big book calls it that strange mental blank spot. This thought pops into my head that if I buy a 6-pack, I can drink 1 beer an hour, and that will be social drinking. So if I can social drink, then they'll stop calling me alcoholic, because alcoholics can't social drink. So I went ahead with that game plan. I bought that 6-pack. I proceeded to tear the labels off of the bottles, because again, by this time the thought, if you drink out of a bottle, it's not as bad as drinking out of a can, So again, I had these things, this level of how bad drinking is. So I had to stay, I always had to stay one level above, as bad as I thought it was. So I tear the labels off the bottles, and I make this, this announcement for everybody to hear, as if anybody pays attention to me, that the bottles without labels were mine. Don't touch them, because that was going to be my barometer to control my drinking. At the end of the night, if I had drunk 6 unlabeled bottles, then everything would be okay. So it was about 25 minutes later, I'm nursing my first drink, and I'm not enjoying it at all, because I don't know about anybody else, but it says in the book that we have the inability to control and enjoy our drinking. So those two words never go together when it came to my drinking. So there I was trying to control my drinking, and it was not enjoyable at all. So I see somebody walk past me with one of my bottles. How do I know it was my bottle? Because the label was torn off. So I thought, again, here's the power of choice, that I chose to drink again. But what I know today is the physical allergy had already been triggered. So the one drink was going to lead to more. I just didn't know it. So, I was like, I'm going to drink then. If they're not going to respect me, then I'm going to drink the way I want to drink. And again, if I had the ability to choose, why would I want to do something that has nothing but bad consequences? But I lack that ability to choose whether I'm going to take that first drink. And once I take that first drink, I can't control it. I heard somebody at a meeting say one time, alcoholism is, best summed up with, I got a mind that won't let me take the first drink, and I got a body that won't let me stop at that first drink. So, and that about sums up, my condition, because when I woke up the next morning, which was May the 5th, 1996, which is my sobriety date, I woke up that morning and I was like, what happened to, I wasn't going to drink? I wasn't so much obsessed with, I drank more than I planned on, because that had happened before. What my mind was stuck on is, why can't I choose to drink or not? I hear spiritual awakening thrown a lot, or, a spiritual experience thrown. It's like, it was a spiritual experience. It's like, no, it's not. It's what, the old timers, when I came in, used to call a moment of clarity. It's when I can actually see things as they actually are, and I can see the truth, and the truth that I saw is that, again, I always had to be not as bad as somebody else. So I always compared myself to my dad, and my dad had 20 plus years on me. So my dad had been drinking 20 plus more years than me. So I always had to compare myself to him. I don't drink as bad as dad, and dad's an alcoholic. So if I don't drink as bad as dad, then I'm not alcoholic. But the thought popped into my head of why I couldn't control it is because, like I said, the thought came from nowhere, and I would have sworn there was somebody standing behind me, because that was how crystal clear the voice was. It was, alcoholism is a progressive illness, and you're not as bad as dad for now. If you continue, you are going to get as bad as him. And if you outlive him, probably worse. And like I said, I was like, where did that, they're going to hair on the back of my neck, raising up still. And this is, like I said, quarter century later. And I knew at that moment that I was in trouble, but like a good alcoholic, it's like, I still thought I could, take care of this myself. So It still took me about 2 weeks to show up into the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. At that time, I had been going to open meetings of AA because, God works in mysterious ways. Like I said, my mother was in Al-Anon, so I thought my problem was my dad. So I had been going to Al-Anon meetings, and they tell you to go to open AA meetings. And because God has a sense of humor, he had put somebody in my path who was actually a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So, and he was coming up on 5 years of sobriety at that time. So not only was somebody in my life who doesn't drink, who says they're alcoholic, but it's somebody who has a length of time. So for me, that was like, oh my God, the AA must work. Because the only other experience I had with AA was an uncle, it was a family acquaintance that we called uncle, but he never stayed sober. He was in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. Well, what I know today is that he never followed through with the 12 steps, and that's why he was in and out, in and out. So this guy was talking about, being in recovery and staying sober for a period of time. And I was like, okay, so AA works. So I sought him out, when I came into the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I knew a few things about a few things. I had listened good enough to know that I should get a home group, I should get a sponsor, and I should get a commitment, because those were the things I heard a lot about, in the fellowship. So I joined the first group that I went to, it was filled with young people. So, there's people around my age. So I felt comfortable around them. So let me join that home group, and I asked this guy to be my sponsor because I knew him, and I knew, I knew his sobriety. So I just asked him because it was all I knew to do, and then, get a commitment. I remember I went to my first business meeting, and they gave out commitments like it was a popularity contest in high school. Let's give it to Joe. Let's give it to Fred. Let's give it to Bob. Let's give it to Dan, and all of the commitments are gone. And like a good alcoholic, rather than speak up, I cop a resentment instead, so I have this sponsor. So I was like, oh, let me share with him. So he goes, so I was like, they didn't give me a commitment. He goes, did you let them know you wanted one? And I was like, well, there's a different way of looking at it, speaking up, and making people aware rather than them expecting to read my mind. What a novel idea, so it was like, so the change in behaviors that could come as a result of action, were kind of taught to me a little bit early, so I actually fought for my first commitment, and I got me the cake commitment, so, I was proud of myself. It was like, I got the trifecta that I hear in meetings, but I wasn't getting well. I wasn't getting well until I found myself in North Carolina, because in North Carolina, they were speaking a different language, than I was hearing at my young people's home group. Because in my young people's home group, what I was hearing a lot of was go to meetings, go to meetings, go to meetings, go to meetings. So I was definitely going to meetings. So I was definitely plugged into the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what happened to me as a result of being plugged into the fellowship is I got a lot of friends. I got a busy social calendar. I got things to do all of a sudden. I even got a girl out of it for a bit, so it's like, my life was skyrocketing in the right direction. But the spiritual malady, still wasn't, getting treated. I wasn't working the 12 steps. And, I had enough exposure to 12-step programs to know that if you come to a 12-step fellowship, you should be working at 12 steps of recovery. So I wanted to work the 12 steps. And I even asked that sponsor one time, I was like, when can we do a 4th step? And, I don't know about anybody else who's on this call, what your home groups are like or what your AA's like in your area. But in my area, you say something out loud and all of a sudden you get the peanut gallery chiming in. So the peanut gallery that was, that heard our conversation chimes in with, you're not sober enough to do a 4th step. So those were some of the people that I was around. They found acceptable behavior in the fellowship, such as a 40-year-old guy dating a 16-year-old girl. So, I mean, it was not exactly, wellness, being promoted. And so when I came to North Carolina, all of a sudden I was met with people talking about, using a strange language such as spiritual experience, God, getting well, and a strange word, recovered, because what I was being taught, when I was first sober, is that I was always going to stay sick. I was always going to, I was always going to suffer. I was never going to get well. And the people, who were around me, who were in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, that's completely acceptable and fine, because that's alcoholism. When I moved down to North Carolina and, I got hooked up with a sponsor who was like, look, my last relapse, was because I was totally immersed in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, but not the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we're going to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he showed me the big book, and His big book looked like crap because he actually used it. My big book looked pristine because I never really, I opened it once because I was told read the first 164 pages. So I cracked the books long enough to do that and then put it on the shelf like it was like I actually accomplished something. So when he showed me that title page, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism, that's when I was like, whoa, where's this recovered word coming from? You know, I'd never heard that before. So he took me to the, you know, forward to the first edition. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So that's what he was telling me that I could recover from. I could recover from the two parts of my illness that I was suffering from. I could you know, if I don't drink, I don't have to worry about the physical allergy. But staying away from that, how can I stay away from that first drink that my mind is demanding that I take? Well, I can't solve that problem. It has to come through a spiritual experience, you know, but if I have a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, then that part of my illness, that mental obsession, gets taken care of. And without the mental obsession, I won't take that first drink. And then the coolest part about it was he showed me the very next sentence, which said to show other alcoholics, which I believe to be me as the reader of the book, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered, which means they're going to show me a path that I can take, is the main purpose of this book. So all of a sudden I fell in love with the book, and I'm only a title page and 2 sentences deep. And that the love of that book has continued for 25 years. You know, I still love that book today. When somebody asks me to sponsor them, it's my go-to guide on what are we going to do? You know, so in that book, it changed my life. And that's the thing that I try and bring to other people. So we started working those 12 steps through the book. And my experience is that you cannot believe that the step is going to work for you. But as long as you take it, it's going to have a profound effect on you. You know, I remember being, like I said, I don't know about anybody else, but when I showed up, I was intelligent. So when I looked at that shade, you know, I saw God twice. So it's like, okay, that's God. Then I saw a whole bunch of capital H's, and I'm like, okay, you're trying to trick me, but that's God too. You know, and then I saw power with a capital P. I'm like, okay, that means God too. You know, so when I took a look at that shade, you know, God was being mentioned by name or by, you know, you know, and you know, another name 9 times in 12 steps. You know, that's a hell of a you know, percentage. You know, so I had a real problem with God when I showed up and when I came here, because my misconception of God is that there was a God, because I was raised, you know, in a Catholic household. I was sent to Catholic school for 12 years, you know, but obviously I didn't get a lot of religious, you know, belief out of it. What I got was the ability to tie a necktie, you know, within 2 times perfectly. You know, so I had that going for me. But all of the stuff that they tried to teach me in school about a loving, caring God, you know, just went right over my head. Because my experience, you know, like I said, as a young child growing up with an active alcoholic, you know, he was physically abusive, he was verbally abusive. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood where I was sexually abused by a next door neighbor. So I had all these childhood traumas going on in life. And the way that I mentally reacted to them is that if there's a God, he doesn't care about me. You know, so that was the misconception I had. And when I see God all over those steps, I'm like, there's no way that God's going to help me, because the God of my understanding tells me, you know, that he doesn't care about me. You know, so, but when we got to that second step, which again, because the first step tells me what my problem is, I'm powerless over alcohol, meaning, I'm powerless over alcohol before I take that first drink. I'm powerless over alcohol when I take that first drink, and I'm powerless over alcohol after I take that first drink. And my life is unmanageable, which, you know, the condition of my life when I showed up in AA was the best I could do with me being in charge. You know, I was a college dropout. I was about to get fired from a retail job. I had a car that was, you know, 3 different colors. It was full, you know, it was full of rust. You know, the seat was chained into place because it was broken. And, you know, people call, you know, it was a piece of crap is what it was. But for me, it was my transportation, you know, so that was the condition of my life when I showed up. And I had family members that wanted nothing to do with me. I had no social life going for me. And I had to have friends that were felons because, again, I always had to hang out with somebody that I wasn't as bad as. So I had to hang out with people who had rap sheets so I could go, at least I'm not as bad as him. So that was the unmanageability of my life when I showed up here. And all of that was being fueled, you know, by this internal condition, you know, that this restless, irritable, and discontent that the doctor talks about in doctor's opinion, that human condition that as an alcoholic, I treat with alcohol. So if you take the alcohol out of the equation, I'm going to need another solution. So when presented with that second step, you know, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could, restore me to sanity. You know, it tells me in the book that lack of power is my dilemma. So if I can't supply that power, I've got to find it from somewhere else. And the only answer that it tells me in the third step is that it's going to come from God. It tells me how it works. There's one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Not 90 days from now, not a year from now, but now. So find God now, and then everything's going to be fine. So again, but I had that problem with God. But in that second step, it tells me in the book, in the chapter We Agnostics, it tells me that I have to believe one of two things. One, that there is a power greater than myself, or two, be open-minded to that power. So am I willing to believe, or, am I even willing to believe that there's a power greater than myself? And it tells me that I have a beginning. So my experience with, being open-minded was, the homework I was given by that sponsor was read We Agnostics and read the second step out of the 12 and 12 for 1 week, because he knew he was dealing with somebody who was closed-minded, so I was doing what I was told, because again, I don't believe that it's going to work for me, but I'm going to do it anyway, because, it was the work in the steps the first time is, it was the character defect of wanting to be liked actually worked for me. I'll do what you want because I want you to like me, because I don't think the step's going to work for me. So I start reading the stuff that I'm assigned to. And there's a thing on page 54 where it talks about, that, we're all worshipers of some kind. It talks about the sunset. It talks about flowers. It talks about other stuff, it talks about people. It talks about money. So I could see that I was always looking at something outside of me to take care of me. If I had more money, I'd be okay. If I had the girl, I'd be okay. I see a sunlight and then the sunrise and say, wow, that's beautiful. So I'd always been a worshiper of something. So why can't I take that belief that I've had in other stuff and instead turn it to God? And that little bit of open-mindedness, I remember I was sitting on the campus of my college, I was sitting by the fountain, and all of a sudden I read that line, I read that little paragraph, and all of a sudden, I swear to God, the sun became a little bit brighter. It became a little bit warmer. The birds sounded a little bit sweeter than they did, before. It was like nothing had changed. The only thing that had changed, is that I was now open-minded to God. And like a good alcoholic, I wanted to experience that again. So I reread the paragraph again, and it did the same effect didn't happen, but I ran to the payphone, and there I'm dating myself again. It was 1996. So for anybody who's, young on the call, we used to have these things called payphones. They're not around anymore. They went the way of the pager. You probably don't know what that is either, but I ran to the payphone and I called my sponsor. And I told him what had happened to me. And he goes, Matt, it sounds like you've had a second step experience and maybe even some of the third. He goes, so let's get together. So we worked that third step, the following day, because now I didn't have to wait a week anymore. So we went on through the rest of the steps. And again, it's not what I thought about them. It's not what I believed about them. Was I going to take them? Because when you get to that fourth step, it talks about it, that searching a fearless moral inventory. If you read the book, and again, because it's going to show me precisely how we have recovered, it talks about putting pen to paper. So it talks about writing. And when I first saw that, I was like writing. I was like, the police call that a written confession. They eat that up. I'm like, you actually want me to make this stuff real by writing it down? And I was told, it's like, well, you said before you wanted what I had, and you're willing to go to any length to get it. So are you still willing? Are you going to do what it says in the book? Are you going to do exactly what it says precisely? So I relented, and, so I wrote that inventory, and then came that dreaded fifth step, to share it with another human being, because again, the fear of not being liked, the fear of being unloved, unaccepted, the fear of being found out, the fear, all these fears, wrap around another human being finding out the real me. So when asked, where do you want to do this inventory? The only response I could come up with was my apartment. And it wasn't because I loved the setting of my apartment. It was, I was actually living in an old hotel that was bought by a private company that was, renovated for student housing. So I was essentially living in a hotel room. So it's not like my hotel room was spectacular, but it's because my thought process was, after I tell him the stuff that I've written down on paper, the cool thing about it is he can't throw me out of my own apartment. So that's why I wanted it to be there. I wanted a little bit of security, that the worst he could do is get up and leave. So we did that fifth step, and instead what I was met with was understanding and love. We moved on through 7, through 6 and 7, where it boils down to all the defects that I just found out I can't fix. That I learned really early on that if there was a self-help book that worked, then the self-help section would consist of one book, and it would probably be a #1 bestseller. but I lack the power to change me. I lack the power to fix me. If selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my problem, I can't make a decision to be selfless and it stick. It's going to have to be followed by a course of action, and that course of action is to ask God to get involved. So we did 6 and 7, which sets you up for 8 and 9. So I got that other list, the list of people that I'm about to approach and make amends to, and again, that goes contradictory because, like I said earlier, I had abused the words "I'm sorry." So I thought what I had was a list of people that I'm going to go and say I'm sorry to. That's not what the 8th step says. It says that we're going to make amends. And my sponsor pointed out to me that amends takes on 2 forms. One, it's to mend, like you could mend a piece of cloth, which means to fix. So I could fix these relationships that I had broken by my reactions, my interactions with them, and amend also means to change, like we amend the Constitution. We actually have to, put it in right, we actually have to change it in order for it to be changed. So I'm going to change my behavior and I'm going to make restitution for the harms I've done. So it's not about saying I'm sorry. It's about repairing the damage that I've done. And, not that sponsor had me through the steps, but today I got a really tough sponsor because he takes things literal. I'm talking about the first time I worked the steps, but it was certainly not the last time I've worked the steps. I was double-digit year sobriety when all of a sudden, in meditation one day, what pops into my head is that, a long time ago, I had either stolen comic books from my cousin because he collected comics and so did I. So I either stole them or I had legitimately borrowed them and just never returned them. So either way, I'm in possession of his property and I've never paid for it. So I owe him an amends. So I guesstimated that it was probably about $500 worth of stuff that I had because I had no idea which ones were his and which ones were mine because they were so intermingled with my collection. So I go to him to make amends and I explain to him that, it's like, look, the reason why I'm here is to make restitution because I either borrowed your comics and never gave them back, or I outright stole them from you without your permission. Either way, I have your property and I would like to pay you for them. Do you think $500 is enough? And he starts laughing, and his response was, he goes, when I was going through my nasty divorce, he goes, my soon to be ex-wife took all of my personal belongings and threw them in a dumpster. He says, to get back at me. He says, I've been walking around for almost a decade thinking all of my comics are gone. And my son had already been born at this time. So he goes, why don't you do me a favor? He says, give your comic book collection to your son. He goes, when he becomes old enough to take care of them properly, he says, and then he'll have my comics. So, so my collection will live on, through your son. And I was like, okay, cool, good deal. But again, I have tough sponsorship in my life. So what I thought is I'm still plus $500 in my account. So, but I got a tough sponsor. So he says to me, he goes, okay, let me get this straight. Your cousin doesn't want his money back. And I'm like, right. He goes, so how does his money automatically become your money because he doesn't want it? And I'm like, oh, I guess that's a different way to look at it. So how can I go about making this, direct amends? He goes, why don't you take the $500 you plan on giving him and give it instead to a charity that you think he would, be for? And it was really easy to come up with. His mother had suffered 2 bouts of breast cancer and lived through it. So, so I took that money and I gave it to, breast cancer foundations, so like I said, that's a sponsorship I roll with today. So it's like, it says it's, the spiritual, life is not a theory. We have to live it. And so I'm held to higher standards, than your average bear, and I'm glad for it because it kind of keeps me on the straight and narrow. So I've made those amends because it says in the 8th step that, we made a list of all persons we have harmed and became willing to make direct amends to them all. So I have to do all of them, not half of them, not part of them. I'm going to do all of them. If you've made the list, I owe you an amends. And the 9th step is go and take care of them. So, so I go and take care of them. And if you look at the 9th step, it says it doesn't say whenever possible. It says wherever possible. So it's not, I'm going to wait for God to put this person in my path and, take care of it, 3 years from now. It's go and take care of it as soon as possible. Because if you look at Dr. Bob's story, Dr. Bob did not get sober until he made his amends. Dr. Bob met Bill, stopped drinking for a couple of weeks, because he was hanging out with Bill. So you might say that Dr. Bob was the first guy who tried just don't drink and go to meetings. And it didn't work because he got drunk again, but when he came in, when he followed through and made his amends, that's when his sobriety began, and that's what we celebrate on June 10th, on Founders Day, the day Dr. Bob said he took his last drink. So, I had to make those amends. And then, like I said, 10 and 11, that's like the bread and butter of what I live now, because the 10 and 11 talk about what I should be doing during the day, what I should be doing in the morning, what I should be doing at night to stay plugged into that power. Because I know today that, I charge my cell phone every day because I want it to work properly. Why would I not charge my spiritual condition every day so that it can work properly? And that's what I need to do. So, 10 tells me what, it's funny how, 10 sets me up for, being imperfect, because I don't know about anybody else, but, my mind tells me that I needed to be perfect. Otherwise, I'm the worst piece of crap on the face of the earth. So when I fall short of being imperfect, the first thing my mind tells me is, see, you're still a screw up. Okay. So my mind, I know today, my mind is not a fan of me doing well. My mind always wants to tear me down. And that's the one thing I can't escape from, because it's stuck on my shoulders. So I'm living with a thing that's not a fan of me doing well. It's not a fan of me being happy. So I can't, and again, there's no self-help book that I'm aware of that's going to change that, because I lack the ability to change that. But if I get God involved in the mix, then I have a fighting chance of being happy, joyous, and free. So that 10 step tells me to continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Do you think it's ironic that I'm on the watch for everything that I found out in the fourth column of my inventory is bad? Why is this stuff still going to pop up? Because I'm human, because I'm not perfect today. It's okay to, here's the secret, that your mind doesn't want you to know. It's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to be human. It's okay to make mistakes. So that I use that 10 step, throughout the day, and at 11 step, it tells me what to do in the morning. It tells me what to do throughout the day. It tells me what to do at night, so I can do spiritual living to the best of my ability. My favorite part of the 11 step is one that I often fall short on. It tells you we pause when agitated or doubtful. I mean, what a novel idea. Don't shoot off your mouth and do something that you're going to have to make amends for later. Because it tells me in that 10th step to make amends promptly if I've needed it. And again, I have a sponsor who's a tough case. That sponsor tells me, he goes, Matt, if you haven't made amends within the past 72 hours, you're not working a 10th step. So he holds me to that high standard. So the 10th and 11th keeping me plugged into that higher power. That's what I need to be doing. Because if I'm not plugged into that higher power, I'm left on Matt's power. My experience of being left on Matt's power, because in 2019, I got a resentment against people in my home group. So I walked away from my home group, so I stopped going to meetings, and I got that tough sponsor who believes in literal English, so when they say meetings means more than one. You have to be going at least 2 meetings a week to be going to meetings, so I wasn't doing that. So I can't be honest with my sponsors. So I don't know about you people, but what I do is I just stop talking to my sponsor. So I'm unplugged from the fellowship. I'm unplugged for sponsorship, and I'm, certainly not doing 10, 11, because if I was doing 10, 11, that first sentence where I continue to watch for resentment, I would have spotted it from a mile away. And I would have done what the book says is, do inventory on it so I can face and be rid of those things within me that have me blocked from God. So, but I wasn't doing that. So what happens to me is that human condition, that spiritual malady starts to fester and starts to grow, so my experience, is that I was at a martial arts convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and I'm sitting in a bar and somebody comes over to me and tells me that it looks like everybody else is having fun, but you look like the most miserable person in here. I know today that was God saving my butt, through a resentment, because if that woman didn't say anything to me, I probably would have continued to sit there and been miserable. What I was actually doing was I was suffering from, the stuff it talks about on page 52, the bedevilments, so if I'm suffering from that stuff and I'm not plugged into God, which is the only thing that's going to take care of it, then I probably would have turned to the only other thing that works, which was alcohol. Because again, I lacked that ability to choose whether I was going to drink or not. I was so sick that I thought I was sitting in that bar making a decision not to drink. How, if I'm without defense against that first drink, I have no idea how much longer it would have lasted, but I know today the truth of it. Again, I still get moments of clarity, even in sobriety, that would have worn down if I continued to stay there, and I probably would have drank, so I know today that on my own power, I'm still an arm's length away from a drink. And, when I call that sponsor again to, fess up, it's like, hey, here's what I've been doing for the past 6 months because I haven't been talking to you. You know, he's like, hey, you know, you can't change the past, but you can work on the present, the future, and the present's going to affect the future. You know, so the first thing he did is get me back into prayer and meditation. He says, let's get you plugged back into God. And the transformative results of getting plugged back into God were like an overnight matter. You know, it was like one day I was suffering from the spiritual malady. I was restless, irritable, discontented, and I was unhappy. And you throw some prayer and meditation in the mix, and all of a sudden I found myself, being happy, joyous, and free. You know, and all I was doing was following a set of directions that were being given to me by another human being. I was being held accountable for my actions. You know, and the other thing he got me involved in, he says, he goes, you got to get re-involved in that 12th step, because how many times in the book does it say we tried to help somebody else? You know, it says twice in the book that if I'm working with others, then I'll get, it says in one part in the book, working with others is giving continuous sobriety. It tells me in another part in the book that working with others is going to get me immunity from drinking. You know, so twice in the book, it's talking about a lasting effect, not just not drinking one day at a time, but not having the problem. You know, the problem's been removed is what it says in the 10th-step promise, so that the problems of alcoholism can be taken away as a spiritual course of living. You know, so those things, like I said, it happened like, you hear it a lot in meetings. Oh, it's in God's time. I believe God's time is now. You know, because when I turn to God, all of a sudden that stuff happens right away. I don't have to wait for it. There is no deadline. It's like, okay, how much longer do I have to hang in there before God takes this away from me? If I get God involved, it happens right away. You know, so all of a sudden, like I was lit on fire, like I had never been before. You know, and like I said, COVID was happening at the time, so all of a sudden it was Zoom meetings, rather than in-person meetings. But I jumped in on Zoom meetings. And I wanted to have fun with it. I didn't want to see the same people that I see all the time and hear the same things that I heard all the time. So I was going to meetings in Kansas. I was going to meetings in North Carolina. I was going to meetings in Texas. I was going to, somehow, I wound up in Mississippi, because, I met Josh, because Josh spoke at a meeting in Canada. I even spoke at a meeting in Canada, so I was creating the fellowship I craved. And the fellowship I craved was other recovered alcoholics, other people who say through spiritual living, we've overcome that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and the problem does not exist for us. They weren't, and the thing about it was they were not saying it from a position of we got it, you don't. It's we would love to show you how, because all they were doing was what the book said, is that, carrying the message to the next sick and suffering alcoholic. It was pointed out to me early in sobriety that there's only 2 steps that have their own chapters in the book. One is We Agnostic, so it's entirely devoted to the 2nd step, which is the first solution step. And then the 12th step, working with others, gets its own chapter. So that 12th step, if it wasn't so important, why would they give it its own chapter? So carrying the message to others, it's what like I said, every other Sunday now, I carry a message to a detox. And like I said, when I first started talking, they call themselves alcoholic, but they don't even know what they're suffering from, because a lot of them sit there. It's not their first rodeo, and they start talking about it. It's like, I can't believe I chose to drink again, or, I chose to, and I try and get them to understand. It's like, dude, or dudette, there are women in there, so it's like, if you have a disease and you didn't take the medicine, the 12 steps, then you're going to suffer from the disease. It's nothing that you've done to yourself, but so the good news is that your last relapse was not your fault. But the bad news is if you don't do something about it, it's going to happen again, and it's like, and I can't tell you how many times that, when I leave there with my speaker, because there's always 2 of us going on a 12-step call together. It's like, we leave there and it's like, we know what alcohol looks like. It says in the book that alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And my observation is that alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful, that you get people wearing pajamas and slippers sitting there saying, I know what I need to do to stay sober. It's like, my sobriety began when I turned to another human being who was like, I know how to stay sober and I'll show you the way. That first sponsor who walked me through the steps, he kind of reminded me that AA was not having a membership drive. They did not knock on my front door and ask me to join the club. I showed up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous because everything I knew to do on my own did not work, and I could not stop drinking on my own. So AA was the last stop on the block for me. So if I was either going to do these 12 steps and get well, or I was going to continue to suffer from alcoholism, it says in the book it's a progressive illness. So that sponsor told me, he says, man, he goes, if you don't do something about your alcoholism, He goes, you're going to get drunk because if you do nothing, you have progressive illness. And then he took me to that part of, work, and how it works. It says half measures avail us nothing. He says, so if you do this half-assed, he says, you're going to get drunk too. He says, so you can do nothing and get drunk. You can do half of it and get drunk, or you can do the whole thing and you can have that guaranteed spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Because look, there's the promise of the 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. So the first paragraph of We Agnostics say the spiritual experience is the only thing that's going to conquer my illness. And I'm guaranteed to get the thing as the result of taking all 12 steps, not some of them, so making all those amends, doing that daily prayer and meditation, because that was the first question that sponsor asked me when I called him after 6 months of hiatus. He goes, what's your daily prayer and meditation life like? It's like, well, it doesn't exist. He goes, and you wonder why spiritual plaque is built up. So we had to chip away that plaque, and then I can take that corrective course of action to kind of, minimize it, getting that bad again. I'm by no means perfect. My kids will tell you, I lose my patience all the time. I'm not a saint. I practice a spiritual way of life, and I do the best I can, and I fall imperfect all the time. I lose my patience with my kids. I yell at them. I get into, I don't get into any screaming matches with my wife. We call them rather loud altercations. So we don't scream. They're just rather loud altercations. So it's like, no, we get in a screaming match. Let's call them what they are. So it's like, so I by no means perfect. Like I said when I first read that thing, the growing up in AA, is something for me that continues. If it says in the book that it's our basic text. And it was shown to me that when I was in school and studied a textbook, I studied the textbook so I could pass the test. If I could pass the test, it means I studied the material well. Well, it was pointed out to me that the test of Alcoholics Anonymous is, can I stay sober and be happy about it? That's the daily test that I get as in AA, and I pass that test every time I do it through spiritual means. There were periods of my sobriety where I was so dry, I was a fire hazard. You want, they say, you want to attract people to what you have, so that they want what you have. There were times in my sobriety where I was, I'd be repulsive to people. It's like, I was trying to take the book and shove it sideways down them, because it's the stuff that they were sharing goes contradictory to a lot of stuff the book says. And I did not make a lot of friends that way. I actually owe an amends for a lot of the behavior that I did, because it's not about telling people this is what you need to do, or worse yet, you're doing it wrong. Instead, what my message is today is, this is what I do. And if you want what I have and you're willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And those steps are going to get me well, because it says in how it works, these are the steps we took, which is suggested as your program of recovery. A lot of the misconception that people have is that suggested steps mean optional steps. They're not optional. They're suggested because it's the only way to get to that spiritual awakening. I had a 5-year, chip in my pocket, when I was 24 years old. My brother is 11 months older than me. So he was 25 and he was diagnosed with fatty deposits on his liver. That doesn't happen by accident. So the doctor was trying to get him to understand, it's like your drinking is causing you damage to your health, and so he was going to quit drinking, so he made a decision to quit drinking. And, it says in the book that I have to be convinced somebody's an alcoholic. So this whole thing about, it's like, we can't call somebody else an alcoholic. I have no idea where that comes from. It's not my job to tell him he's alcoholic, is what the book tells me. They have to figure that out on their own. But my brother's definitely alcoholic because he shows all the symptoms of it, so he made a decision he wasn't going to drink. And I remember his wife asking me, she goes, is there another way to get sober other than AA? Because I don't think your brother will ever go to AA. And I said, there may be other ways, but I don't know about them, because the only people I know who stay sober do it by doing AA. So AA works for them. And if I do what they do, ahead of me, then it works for me. So he can do whatever he wants to try, and, I just turned 45 in June. My brother will turn 46 next week. Actually, yeah. Next week he'll turn 46, and he still drinks today. because he lacks the ability to choose whether he's going to drink or not. And I can totally relate to him. So I don't talk about it from any high spiritual mountaintop like I'm better than him. I just know that if I don't do what I need to do, then I will suffer just like him. So I actually feel bad for him that he has to suffer from this disease, because he does have a way. He does have a way out. He just chooses not to do it, because that's the only choice we have in the matter. Are we going to take the 12 steps and get well, or are we going to suffer from this disease? And I'll just end with this, because I love ending with some type of humor. Is that if for those of you on the video call, it's like you see me wearing I was raised in AA to show AA the respect it deserves. So get a little dressed up when you're speaking. So you see me wearing a blazer, and you see me wearing an orange and blue shirt, collared shirt. My son drew me a Father's Day card, and he drew me a self picture. So unfortunately, he drew it to the depiction of the way he sees me. So he drew the guy with gray hair, because my son's honest. So the guy's got long gray hair. Okay. But my son drew me wearing a blazer and a collared shirt. The only time he's ever seen me do that is whenever I'm doing a Zoom meeting. Okay. So my son sees me as, somebody who speaks at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And a couple of weeks ago, he wanted me to watch TV with him. He wanted me to watch, a show with him that, was important to him, that, he spent time with me, because, he wants to spend time with me. That was not something I wanted to do with my alcoholic dad, was, spend time with him. But my son wants to spend time with me, and I was going to be speaking at a meeting that night. So I just told him, I said, "No, buddy," I said, "I'm sorry." I'm going to a meeting tonight. And because of the pandemic and because of being locked down for a couple of months, I explained to my son what AA was, and, that I'm an alcoholic and I don't drink. So he knows what AA does for me. And he knows that active participation in AA is important for me to stay well. So he asked me, he goes, "You going to a meeting?" He goes, "You going to an AA meeting?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Are you speaking again tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, helping other people is a really good reason not to hang out with me." So my son is learning selfishness and self-centeredness, because that's what I'm showing him, and I can only show him that because he gets the best me when I'm plugged into God and I'm plugged into fellowship. So with you people and with God, I can be the better me. Without those two things, I'm going to be restless, irritable, discontented, and most likely turn back to a drink to feel better, because it's the only other thing that ever worked. And thanks for having me. Thanks for asking me again. I just love the title of this group, the Grace Group, because my daughter's middle name is Grace, because when we were picking her name, it was either going to be Faith, Grace, or Hope, and we went with Grace because we wanted the same initials as my son. Thanks for having me.